Unit 2, Section 1, Jamestown through the beginning of the French and Indian War. The first part of Section 1 that we're going to talk about is we have to link to the last unit. And in the last unit, we talked mostly about Spanish and French exploration and colonization of the New World. In Unit 2, we're talking about colonization by England. And England mostly colonized around the eastern coast of what is today the United States. And so from this map here, you can see that it consisted of these 13 colonies along the eastern coast, and then the French colonies are signified in blue. The Spanish colonies are signified in orange. So the English mostly settled along the eastern coast. French mostly settled up in Canada, around the Great Lakes, and down the Mississippi River. And the Spanish mostly settled in the present-day state of Florida, the southwestern part of what is today the United States, Mexico, Central and South America. The English colonies are divided up into three regions. And from this map here that you can see that where the northernmost region was known as New England, and they consisted of the four colonies, two that we're going to discuss, Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and the mid-Atlantic colonies, signified here in pink, consisted of four colonies, but the ones we're going to talk about are New York and Pennsylvania, and the southern colonies, signified here in yellow, consisted of five colonies, and one that we're going to talk about was Virginia. The New England colonies are characterized economically by shipping and trade. Why? Well, we go back to the map here and we see that these are the northernmost colonies. They had short growing seasons, but what they did have an advantage in is lots of natural harbors. And natural harbors are important because they enable the ships to be able to come and port right next to land. The New England colonies least depended on agriculture. That's not to say that they didn't grow food, but they didn't grow food for trade, or they didn't grow food for sale as a cash crop. The system that really born the New England colonies was one known as mercantilism. Mercantilism is a British economic system, and it is defined as a system that the mother country, England in this case, requires that all raw materials are shipped to their country, manufactured in their country, and then sold back to the colonies. And what I would like for you to write in on your notes here at the end of A1 is that the goods would have to be paid to England with gold and silver, which ultimately means that the colonies would run dry of money. One of the most important people in early colonial history was Benjamin Franklin, and you've probably seen a picture of Benjamin Franklin before. Here he is without his trademark bifocal glasses. Benjamin Franklin was a symbol of social mobility in the colonies, and the term means that he was born very poor. At the age of 5, he began working as an apprentice to a publisher who had skills with printing presses. Early in his life, he was taken to England, where he furthered his abilities with printing presses. He saved almost every dime he ever made. He comes back to the colonies. He buys his own printing press. He writes his own articles. He publishes his own newspaper and becomes wealthy, one of the wealthiest Americans by the time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He was also a symbol of individualism, and what that means is that while in England, he develops an affinity, a likeness for the Enlightenment movement, and that is where people began to use reason instead of emotion. Here is a picture of a document that he was the editor, publisher, writer for, and that was called Poor Richard's Almanac. Another important part of Benjamin Franklin is this idea of the Enlightenment is that he didn't just accept the status quo. Here's an example of something that he invented as a leader of the Enlightenment, and this is a battery. He also invented bifocals and a Franklin stove, which would transfer heat away from someone's home so that they could cook and that type of thing. The government in New England was signified by, because everybody in New England lived sort of in close proximity, the people in New England were able to have more of a local kind of government. And here is a picture of a typical courthouse in which everybody in a New England town could meet and then discuss politics. Many of the early English colonies were started by charter. A charter is a legal document in which the king grants the right for that colony to self-rule. England was 3,000 miles away from the colony, so this was an important characteristic of early colonial governments. An example of what happened to all 13 of the charters occurred in Massachusetts. Massachusetts depended on trade so much that many of the colonists that lived there did not necessarily follow these acts that I'm showing you here in the um, slide. These are called the Navigation Acts, and these are the acts that the English Parliament used to enforce mercantilism upon the colonies. And so oftentimes, especially in New England, these acts were ignored. And to punish these colonies, England took away Massachusetts' charter or their legal right to rule themselves. And eventually, almost every colony of the 13 became royal colonies. And this is a map that shows you the colonies that eventually became royal colonies. The specific reason for the New England colonies being founded was religious. Many people in England had begun to be persecuted by the new Catholic Church in England, known as the Church of England, and they were persecuted for their religious beliefs. Two of the most famous groups to be persecuted badly in England were the Pilgrims, shown in this picture here, and the Puritans. The Pilgrims founded Plymouth as one of their first early colonies, and here's possibly Plymouth Rock, which is a big tourist attraction there. And this is around the area. The historians believe that Plymouth actually landed and started their colony for religious freedom. And so Plymouth was, this is Massachusetts, and you can see where Plymouth was located around the Atlantic Ocean. The Puritans, well, first the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were known as separatists. The Pilgrims were the more radical of the two groups. They left England because they believed that they should separate from the Catholic Church. The Puritans, as shown in this map here, about 20,000 of them came to the New World in the 1630s and 40s, and they weren't quite as radical as the Pilgrims. They just wanted to purify the Catholic Church, to change it, not necessarily break away from it. But both groups were equally persecuted in England. Here's an example of the fundamentalist nature of the Pilgrim and the Puritan religion, is that many of the Puritans and Pilgrims believed that in order to get into heaven, you had to go through a conversion process. In order to go through the conversion process, you had to have so many witnesses that belonged to the church that believed that you deserved to go to heaven. And so there was a lot of persecution within the Puritan and Pilgrim church, and that's what this drawing, this artwork here demonstrates, is this man and woman are being punished by the Puritans, and we're not told in the drawing what it's for, but probably, if I was guessing, probably for adultery. And this is the kind of punishment that they would do to try to get people to change their ways. So obviously you can see that it was hard to get people to stay in the Puritan church. So one of the techniques that the Puritan ministers used to try to get people back into the church was to allow the children of members automatic membership into the church. Well, this worked really well short term, but when those children grew up and got older, they realized the difficulties that they would encounter being members of the church, and many of them dropped out. So membership in the Puritan church did increase because of the halfway covenant, but eventually it decreased. Another event that caused membership in the Puritan church to decline was the Salem witch trials. 5 girls were accused of being witches. They were tried by the clergy of the Puritan church, and they were tried because they were found practicing witchcraft, but the real reason why they were probably tried was because they were from the poorer families in the community. And so there was a social stratification within the Puritan community. Uh, what eventually happened in the trial is that 19 Puritans were hung, and over 200 were imprisoned. They hung one dog they accused of being a witch, and they pressed one man to death. Obviously, the Salem witch trials went a long way towards a loss of membership in the Puritan church. An attempt by Puritan ministers to save the Puritan church was the Great Awakening. In the 1730s and 1740s, famous preachers known such as Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, they preached and tried to, as I would say, scare people into heaven. And while this did save the Puritan church for a period of time, eventually it's going to decline in its membership. One cause of this decline in membership were new preachers that disagreed with the teachings of the Puritan church, like Roger Williams. Roger Williams was banished from the colony of Massachusetts, and he founded a colony known as Rhode Island. Here's a drawing of Roger Williams. Lastly, for the New England colonies, a characteristic was the relationship with Native Americans. Lots of battles were fought between Native Americans and Puritans and Pilgrims in New England. The most famous was King Philip's War in 1675, 100 years before the Revolutionary War. And this is known as the bloodiest war in American history per capita. What that means is it's a smaller number of people that fought in this war, but a higher percentage of casualties and deaths. Eventually the Puritans defeat King Philip. King Philip was attempting to try to stop white migration west of the Appalachian Mountains, and it failed. And so the Puritans won the war, and they began to expand into the Ohio River Valley and beyond. This concludes a lesson on Unit 2, Section 1, New England.